This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew Jones and with me as usual is
Sarah Bolt.
How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. And how are things with you?
Yeah, well, maybe as people are listening to this, they might be travelling up to Dairy Tech, and I'm guessing we'll be up there as well.
That's where I'm going to be on when it's released.
Yes, it's the 4th of February, and it's Dairy Tech Day, and so maybe many of you are listening to this in the car on your way up. I know Sarah will obviously be there with Kingshay. Unless anything goes wrong, I intend to be there wandering around. And usually, if you know who I am, you can't miss me, is all I can say. But if you do get to Dairy Tech, hopefully you have a good day. And if you do see us, then obviously we're both more than happy to have a word. So please do come and say hello.
Please do. I'm also doing one of the panel discussions as well, Andrew.
Oh, yes, I did see that. Yes.
You're going to ask me what time, and I should have looked it up. I want to say 10:45, but, you know. I
think that rings a bell from what I did read. And just tell everybody what you're talking about.
So talking about let me think. Let me put this in the right context here, Andrew. Helping farmers to choose the right cow monitors for their farm. What do they need to consider?
All based on the survey you've done fairly recently, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's all based on the Kingshay tried and tested cow monitors survey.
That's right. I couldn't remember the tried and tested, but I knew it was that. But anyway, enough of Dairy Tech. Hopefully, if you say you go, you have a good day. We are here today talking to our guest. In my head, I keep calling it colostrum, but while we do talk about colostrum and the important things, the 5 Qs, etc., we're here talking about transition milk, aren't we?
We are, which I think is just sort of that next step on from that best practice in colostrum management, and then just taking it to the next level, really, and feeding that transition milk whilst it's still high in all those immunoglobulins and everything else that we soon find out about. Well,
exactly. It's a really interesting conversation. By transition milk, we're talking sort of days 2 to 4. But the trial work, I think they fed up to about day 14 with the calves. Not milk of day 14, but 2 calves of day 14. But it's really interesting the benefits they found of feeding this colostrum milk, because as Sarah's just alluded to, it's still full of goodies. It might not be colostrum, but it's still full of goodies. So I guess let's go take a listen and see what we can learn today. This podcast has been brought to you today by Chewing the Cud Limited, who offer completely independent dairy and beef nutrition, cow signals advice and training, along with ROMS mobility scoring. For more details on these and other services available, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on nutrition@chewingthecud.com. Chewing the Cud Limited now offers first aid training from a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Or sign up to our website, www.chewingthecud.com, for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode.
And links to our socials, including Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast. All one word, and remember, no G.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Right, and welcome back. And today we are going to be talking about colostrum with Dr. Ryan Davies from Veterinary Technical Consulting Limited. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Andrew. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Now, we had hoped to have Ryan on back in the late summer, early autumn last year, when we sort of had a bit of a theme running through of your transition cow management and your heifers and whatever, and we wanted to have one in there about colostrum. But we had to wait because Ryan had to have a paper published in the Dairy Journal of Science, and that's obviously been published now, hasn't it, Ryan?
That's been published, and the study was actually on a spring block calving herd, so potentially the timing now is going to be quite relevant to your listeners.
Well, exactly. It ties in nicely for that anyway. So before we get on to that, Ryan, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
So my name is Ryan Davies. I'm a veterinary surgeon, graduated from the University of Edinburgh back in 2002, many moons ago. I was in clinical practice for over 20 years. And then in 2023, I decided to form my own company, looking at consultation work on more proactive preventative medicine planning and reducing the use of antibiotics on farm. That's where I am today. And I do a lot of consultation work with the Saskatoon Colostrum Company Limited, SCCL, that are a global leader in manufacturing whole bovine colostrum powder.
And then, so what brought this, let's start at the beginning, what brought this trial around to bring it on? I guess maybe just tell us a little bit over about the trial and then we'll get into a little bit more detail about it.
Yeah, so really it began from an observation from the farmer. So it's as I said, it's a spring calving, block calving herd in West Wales, 550 cows, pasture-based. And what they noticed initially was that aligning with Johne's disease sort of controls, they were moving the dairy heifer replacements onto milk replacer on day 2 of life. And they were pooling the fresh cow milk, the unsaleable milk, and feeding it to the beef calves. And what they noticed, there was a higher incidence of disease in the dairy heifers than there was in the beef animals. So the question came up, well, actually, what's in this fresh cow milk that may be benefiting these beef animals? So they changed the strategy and got a pasteurizer, pooled that fresh cow milk, pasteurized it, and actually fed it to the dairy heifers. And there was a remarkable reduction in disease incidence and mortality in that group. So the following season, I actually applied to the Welsh government to receive a grant to actually test this milk and actually see if the quality of it could be recorded and how that influenced the health and future growth of these calves. So that's how generally.
What stage are we talking, like 2 to 10 days or how many days milk are we talking?
So it's defined as milkings 2 to 6 after calving. So really on day 4, the cow will be producing mature milk. So really it's that fresh cow milk that you're not putting into the tank and that we would classify as transition milk.
Obviously, this was done on a pasture-based spring calving herd over in West Wales, like you say. What's the difference between a pasture-based herd compared to maybe one that's housed?
Well, that's a really good question, Andrew. And if you talk to somebody from New Zealand, a pasture-based system would involve calving outdoors and leaving the calf with the cow for 24 hours and then bringing them into the rearing shed. In this part of the world, Ireland is predominantly pasture-based dairy country. But up in this part of the world, we would normally have a hybrid system where you're still calving them indoors. You're still involved in that colostrum management in the first 24 hours. And potentially the animals don't go out until they're weaned. So it's kind of a hybrid system. So the answer to your question, in the first sort of early life period for the calves, potentially it's no different. in our system. We call it pasture-based because we are producing milk from grass. But potentially for the early life of the calf, it may not be that different.
And I guess the fact that it's block calving makes it, sort of easier to have all of those calves and do that research on a block calving system than perhaps it would be on an all year round system.
Yeah, I mean, on an all year round system, you can pool transition milk and feed it in similar fashion if you've got the numbers. So it's all about the numbers. You have to have sufficient volume to actually make it a feeding strategy to pool and feed that milk. And so it applies to larger herds as well. And I know a lot of autumn block calvers do it as well. But I think the relevance is there's been a lot of work in research recently looking at use of colostrum after the first day of life or feeding transition milk in order to improve the health and productivity of calves. And if you think about in nature, the calf suckling the cow, they naturally receive this transition milk on day 2, 3, and 4. And it's beneficial to their gut development and future growth. Obviously, in a dairy system, traditionally, we may have taken that away from them. And they're more susceptible to disease because of that. And a lot of your listeners may be using vaccines that provide additional protection to calves against pathogens that cause neonatal calf diarrhea. So we're talking about rotavirus, coronavirus, E. coli, and more recently, cryptosporidium. But in order for these vaccines to be fully effective, not only do you need to ensure good transfer of antibodies into the bloodstream of the calf in that first 24-hour period, but you also need to almost drip feed the calf with these antibodies over the next, in research, it's shown to be beneficial up to 10 to 14 days, in one study up to 21 days, before the gut has developed its own immunity to deal with these pathogens, which occurs around 21 days of age. So the relevance talking about is it's actually quite difficult for farmers to do this on a large scale. So if you're asking them to store excess colostrum and feed a very small supplement on day 2, 3, 4, 5, possibly up to day 10, day 14, it's quite difficult for them to do that because 1, you've got to have excess colostrum. 2, you've got to store it in a fashion whereby you don't allow bacteria to multiply. And 3, it's actually got to be it's got to be easy for them to do. So how can I say? The labor considerations need to be approached.
It's got to be practical, hasn't it? Because if it's not practical, it doesn't get done.
Yeah, practical. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you, Andrew. And that's why we are seeing more and more of this pooling of the transition milk, because it's a group of cows you can milk, you can pool it, you can pasteurize it, and then you can feed it to the young calves. So it's a practical application of the science, really.
So taking a step back then, obviously the farmer noticed this difference. Obviously, must have been one of your clients spoke to you. You've got this money. So then, what happened? What was involved with the trial on the farm to give you the results that you've now got?
So the trial involved me putting my welly boots on, Andrew, and tending the farm every day, because we know that the biggest predictor of future calf health is still passive immunity. So it's still most important to achieve a good level of antibodies in the bloodstream of the calf in that first 24 hours. And we do that through good colostrum management. So I attended the farm every day in order to blood sample the calves for passive immunity, because you need to do that to know where you're starting from. Because if you've got a calf that's got high levels of passive immunity, it is already less susceptible to disease and going to have improved growth outcomes than a calf that's achieved low levels of passive immunity.
Now, starting at calving, were they snatch calved or were they given a chance to suckle and then supplemented immediately once they were picked up at, 12 hours? How long were the calves left with the cows for you to be testing for that passive immunity?
So it Varied, Andrew. And I think, probably a lot of your listeners would agree that, strict snatch calving 24/7, 365, let's be honest here, you need to have considerable staffing in order for that to occur. So the reality of the situation on commercial farms is we try to snatch calve when we can, but it may be that certain hours of the night or at certain times, calves do have the opportunity to suckle. So the answer to that question is that it was varied. But we know that the calf is unable to absorb antibodies from colostrum after about 24 hours of age. So we call that gut closure. So anytime after 24 hours, ideally as soon as possible, you can blood sample the calf to see the concentration of antibodies in the bloodstream. So I attended the farm every day so that I did that in the optimal period, which is between 24 to 48 hours of age. And with that bit of data, we knew where we were starting from.
So we're just talking about passive immunity there and colostrum management. Is it worth just touching on just a reminder for our listeners as to what's best practice when it does come to that colostrum handling to make sure that we are getting the best transfer of immunoglobulins as possible?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sarah, because there have been considerable developments in the field of colostrum management, even since I was in college, So we're looking at the cues of colostrum there. It's beneficial to test the colostrum with a Brix refractometer on farm because when you do that, a higher Brix percentage corresponds to a higher level of antibody in that colostrum. So obviously, if you're administering more concentrated colostrum, you are going to get more antibodies in the bloodstream of the calf. So you're testing with a Brix refractometer. The minimum standard is 22% Brix, which would correspond to 50 grams per liter of antibody. But if we achieve 25% Brix, suddenly you're pushing that number up to 75 grams per liter of antibody. So it's a 50% increase. So it may not look like much on the refractometer, but if you can reserve 25% Brix colostrum for the first feeding for calves, then you're administering more antibody. And once we get up to 30% Brix, then we're talking about 100 grams per liter of immunoglobulin G in that colostrum. And I call that rocket fuel because the calves that have really, really the best start. So the concentration of antibody, that's one of the cues, the quality. And then we're looking at the quantity. I always like to take these together because what we're trying to do is we're trying to feed 300 grams of antibody in the first 12 hours. If we do that, we can achieve what we call excellent transfer of passive immunity. Now, traditionally, we used to have a dichomatous standard for passive immunity. We used to say failure of passive transfer or successful passive transfer. And I'm sure your listeners will have heard that term. We've moved on from that now. There's a scale. More is better. So in order to achieve the excellent level, which would be greater than 25 grams per liter immunoglobulin G in the bloodstream, or over 6.2 grams per deciliter serum total proteins. So a lot of your clients will, when they test their calves for passive immunity, they'll be using serum total proteins as opposed to immunoglobulin G directly because vets can do it quite quickly and easily on farm with a refractometer.
So, I mean, talking refractometers, they're so cheap and easy to get hold of that every dairy farm ought to have one, isn't it? They're under £35 and readily available online, and just gone are the days of a colostrometer that, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I've broken quite a few over the years because they're just not very hardy on farm and everything else. So, but my Brix refractometer has been going for many years now and is probably the cheapest tool that does so much on farm.
Yeah, and colorimeters are temperature sensitive as well. So a Brix refractometer, as long as you calibrate it, remember to calibrate it daily, then it's a really good tool to have on farm. So yes, the quantity then is important along with the quality. So I was saying 300 grams of antibody in the first 12 hours. As you can tell, from what I said before, if you have 30% Brix, that's 100 grams per litre. You only need 3 litres of that and you're home and dry. So those are two of the important cues. The other one is timing, or all of your listeners will be aware of this. Actually getting in there within the first 2 hours, if you can, you're going to maximize absorption. Because remember, a calf will only absorb 25-30% of antibodies that you administer over that first 24-hour period. In the first couple of hours, it's probably 50-60%. So getting in there early is important. The other cues are squeaky clean, the cleanliness. This is an aspect of colostrum management that's becoming more and more significant. We need to make sure that colostrum is low in bacterial counts, much as you do with your bulk milk tank. If you think about it, you've got plate coolers and a bulk tank that's refrigerated in order to bring the temperature of that milk down to an acceptable level and keep the bacterial counts low. If the bacterial counts are too high with colostrum, you're shooting yourself in the foot because the calf will not absorb the antibodies. The lining of the gut gets damaged and the antibodies get bound by the bacteria. And then you have the last cue, which is quietly what we're talking about, is biological stress. So remember, if you have to deliver a calf and the calf comes out stressed, it's going to absorb less antibodies. If it's particularly cold day, less than 10 degrees, the calf is going to absorb less antibodies. If it's particularly hot, the calf is going to absorb less antibodies. And also remember any kind of stress. So there was one study that showed that if the calf was fed in the presence of the dam, then it absorbed more antibodies than if you took it away.
It's not interesting.
So, yeah. So when you're on farm and you see sort of the calf rearers sometimes getting a bit overzealous and rugby tackling the calves to feed them, I say, no, you're gonna reduce absorption. And the final cue then is by. We need to test our calves. It's such an important KPI for calf health and future productivity. We need to test our calves routinely rather than waiting for there to be a problem. So I would encourage farmers, along with your vet, to do a few calves each month to establish how the colostrum management program is going.
Well, I was going to say that's a lot easier now. I mean, a podcast we've done in the past, obviously, was with the immunology. And obviously that's about testing what the colostrum transfers like in the calf, isn't it? And it's relatively easy. You can do it on farm yourself if you want to.
Yeah, and the key point there, Andrew, is you're joining the dots. So traditionally, we would test with the refractometer. Oh, great, this is 25% Brix, down the hatch, we're all good. But remember, the calf has to absorb those antibodies as well. And there's several factors, like I said, timing, bacterial count, stress, that may influence that. So we had a herd once where we were measuring the absorption of antibodies in the calves by quantifying what was fed and quantifying what was in the bloodstream accurately. And it turned out the calves weren't absorbing the antibodies, and it was purely due to too many difficult calvings, overconditioning of the dry cows, and the calves were stressed coming out. They just didn't absorb the antibodies. So I find it, of colostrum management, a fascinating subject. But yeah, it's important to test because the calves still have to absorb the antibodies.
So in your trial, were they testing colostrum on farm before then you were testing the calf to see what its transfer had been like?
So they weren't testing the colostrum because the first feed of the calves, they were receiving SCCL powdered colostrum.
You had a control of what they were getting?
We had a control that was initiated on the farm in previous years, basically a disease control measure because they had some mycoplasma in the past. And also basically to labor considerations, how can I put it? It's remember that if you're harvesting colostrum, you don't have a frozen store, you're harvesting it twice a day. If you're getting calves born in the middle of the day in that sort of system, potentially there could be a delay for feeding. So he didn't have a frozen store. So we administered that first feed via powdered colostrum to standardize it, to have a consideration for disease control and to make it easier for the staff.
So then what were you finding? You took those bloods at, would you say, 24, 48 hours. What were those showing you?
So that was most first interesting bits about the trial was the massive variation in the antibody level in the calves. So I think we had down to 4 grams per litre, up to over 70 grams per litre. So as I told you, the standards would be different these days, and we would call under 10 grams per litre antibody in the bloodstream a very poor level of passive transfer. And those animals are highly susceptible to mortality and disease, and even their growth is going to be impeded. And actually, recent recommendations now suggest that these animals shouldn't really be bred as dairy replacements, because they are not going to, even if they make it to the herd, they're less likely to go back in calf and get on to the second lactation. So we had a few under 10 gram per litre, but then we had quite a few over the optimal level, which would be 25 grams per litre IgG. So we had a really wide range of antibodies from that first 24-hour period, which was really good because it gave us a broad spectrum of how these calves would perform when they were fed this variable quality transition milk.
That's interesting, your comment, though, that they're saying, you said below 10, not to even worry about following those animals through into the milking herd because they just don't succeed. I mean, I guess that makes me think about something, the first loss is the best loss sort of thing, rather than continue, because they'll struggle. And I suppose it also fits in, I'm just thinking out loud here, with the one we did on epigenetics in terms of switching certain genes on and certain genes off. And if they're not getting those antibodies to start with, they're just not going to perform. And it just shows that you've got to get, I'd take a step back and say, your colostrum, in this instance, they were using the powder. But your colostrum starts with your dry cow. You've got to get that right to get the colostrum quality right to then follow through. It just shows how much we are learning now in how it all connects up, and actually what a difference it makes by getting it right, how it affects the next generation and potentially the next generation going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you hear this term on farms sometimes, survival of the fittest. Well, having done this study and blood sampled every single calf for passive immunity, I realized, no, it's not survival of the fittest. There are factors going on that will explain why this calf is doing a lot better than that calf, and why this calf is growing better than that calf. And it all centers around colostrum management in that first 24 hours.
That early life experience has such an impact.
Yeah, and like you say, Andrew, epigenetics, we're spending a lot of money on genetics. In order to optimize those, it all starts with colostrum.
It's amazing, isn't it? That people, how do I put it? People don't give it the time and the respect, I don't know if that's the right word, to make the best uses of colostrum. I know there are some people listening who will say, well, this is just the basics. But I can promise you there are some people out there who aren't giving colostrum the time that it's needed. And, it's a message that's been out there for a long time, and it's still, I don't think, being fully utilized by some people out there. And again, we're reinforcing it, but we now have the evidence that can start to back up why it's important.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Andrew. Some people may be listening and saying, okay, I got this covered, but introduced it as a KPI. Sample a few calves each month. And if you're using serum total proteins, then, quite often on farms I hear, 5.5, that's good enough. But let's push the bar up a little bit. Trust me, you will notice the calves will grow better, they will perform better, and they're way less susceptible to disease. So if you can push that up to 6.5, I tell some farms, aim high, let's get them higher. So just having a minimum standard and saying I'm over that line, that's not really good enough anymore if we want to maximize the productivity of our dairy herds.
Well, as you say, the productivity, but just the health benefits. What you're saying is, that little bit of time at this stage in their life makes such a huge difference. And, most of their organ growth is in that early part. And, all of these things happen now. And that's when we need to concentrate, because it makes the difference for the rest of their lives.
And the other thing we should talk about, Andrew, is, I was on one farm and I was discussing the benefits of improvements he's made in colostrum management. And we were discussing, all the different benefits. And we're talking about these productivity benefits, growth, less disease, all that sort of stuff. And I was discussing with him, and then he said, yeah, and then there's this. And he just pointed to his head. And what he was referring to was mental health. If you're a calf rearer and you're going into that shed every day and you've got calves that you're trying to keep alive, they're diseased, you're losing them. And then there's another one that was bright yesterday. It's really demoralizing, and you have to pay attention to mental health. Actually going into a calf shed and having all the calves coming to meet you, jumping around, consuming their milk, not having disease. We're reducing antibiotic usage, sustainability. The list just goes on and on and on. So, that's always consider mental health as well.
That's a fair shout.
That sustainability one's a really big one as well, isn't it? The impact of not getting that colostrum right over the lifetime of that cow going into the herd, the additional carbon footprint of that poor health, poor growth, not getting back in calf, all of those impacts are huge on carbon footprinting.
Well, actually, Sarah, funny you should say that, because yesterday I was following up. It's probably good that we're doing this this podcast now, Andrew, because the beef animals are starting to reach slaughter weight. Now, there was 92 Wagyu cross animals in the group, and these animals are getting slaughtered now. And we're finding, obviously, I'm hoping that we're going to statistically prove this, but we're finding that the animals with the higher levels of IgG in the bloodstream obviously grow quicker, and they're going to reach their finishing weight sooner, and that is sustainability. That's.
You've probably answered the question I was going to ask later on in the podcast, so which is good, and we'll probably go back to it, because I'm thinking, let's take a step. You tested those at, what do you say, at 24, 48 hours old. You had that variation. So then what happened on farm once they'd been tested? What were then the next steps within your trial?
So the next step was the animals received that pooled pasteurised transition milk from day 2 to day 10.
Was there anybody knocked out? Because you say they weren't testing for colostrum, didn't you say? So it was everything went in there.
Yeah. So the fresh cows going into the bulk tank. So really, what was in that feed was excess colostrum from the cows, because remember, colostrum is defined as the first milking after calving, and then transition milk, which is milkings 2 to 6. So day 4, they were going into the bulk tank. Everything prior to that was pooled within this feed.
Okay, so then how long were the calves getting this pooled transition milk?
So they were getting that till they were 10 days old. And then they moved into the larger groups in the rearing shed. And then they were fed pasteurized whole milk then until weaning.
Right, so they did go on to whole milk afterwards. They weren't transferred then onto a powder of some kind. It was just simply using pasteurized whole milk from the farm. Pasteurized
whole milk. But the real point of the paper, so everything we've discussed up until now, we're talking about colostrum management that first 24 hours. In the research literature, that's been pretty well established. But the purpose of the paper was to look at the variability in the quality of this pooled excess colostrum and transition milk. And what we found was we tested for immunoglobulin G antibody.
So were you testing that every day, the pool every day, or how were you testing?
Twice a day.
Twice a day. Testing the pool twice a day.
Yeah. So it was obviously the fresh cows are milked last. The feed was made up for the following feed, the after. So if you milked the cows in the morning, that was the afternoon feed for the calves. So we took a sample from it every day, from each batch, so twice a day. That was then sent for analysis of immunoglobulin G. So much like you do with colostrum, testing the IgG content as a biomarker of quality. But we also tested it on farm with a Brix refractometer. So if we talk in Brix readings, which will be far more sort of relevant to your readers, we found that the Brix variability on that feed through the calving season varied from 10 to 10.5% Brix, which would which was equal to what was in the bulk tank. So it was effectively whole milk, up to 15-16% Brix. So you can immediately see that some calves that received 10.5% Brix, they were receiving whole milk. So they weren't actually receiving transition milk. And going back to our point about farmers that are investing in vaccines in the dry cows for pathogens that cause neonatal calf diarrhea, if that's the case, then these calves will not be receiving protection from the antibodies derived from that vaccine in that post-gut closure period, which is days 2 to 10.
So could you factor that back as to why there was the variation there? Was it certain days, certain age cows, time of the calving periods, certain weather? Did any of these, were you able to tie it back to anything like that?
So the main influential factor was calving density. So we had one night where 10 cows calved overnight. So obviously, you are going to have a lot more colostrum in that pool. So it's going to push the Brix up. So the quality is going to be higher. And that occurred at the beginning of the calving season. Right at the beginning, when the maiden heifers came in, when they calved, obviously then the quality was a little bit less at that point. Or when the main bulk of the cows came in, then obviously the quality went up. The other factor that was influential was as the calving pattern started to stretch out and we had less dense calvings, it may have been that we only had 2 or 3 calved over a 24-hour period, and we had quite a few calves in the 10-day-old group, up to 10-day-old group to feed. So we then had to add whole milk in order to achieve the desired volume to feed all those calves. So you were then diluting it. You were diluting that pool and reducing the solids. So that was an influential factor as well.
So it was purely on calving density rather than age or, well, you said heifers, obviously, but rather than weather or anything like that, it was predominantly due to just density of calving.
Yeah, and that answers the question. So, if you've got a listener now thinking, well, hang on a minute, I've milked my fresh cows, I've got this much transition milk. I've tested the Brix. It's above what my bulk tank is, so I know it's transition milk. What do I do? I've got X amount of calves up to 10 days old, up to 14 days old. Do I feed it as it is and prioritize the younger calves, but maybe they're only getting in for 5-6 days? Or do I add whole milk in order to feed it for a prolonged period, which would be 10 to 14 days? And the answer to that question is you need to maintain the quality. So in that scenario, you are better off prioritizing the younger calves and adding whole milk and diluting it to a point where you're not actually getting the benefits of feeding transition milk, but feeding it for longer. So it's quite, and this is an area where, partly the reason why the paper was published, this is an area where the global colostrum research community is prioritizing at the moment.
So let's go back to the research you did. What did you find when these calves were fed the transition milk for 10 days?
Yeah, so it was all down to the quality of that transition milk there. Very simple. The calves that received a higher quality transition milk grew faster to weaning because we weighed calves at birth, weighed them at weaning. Another interesting aspect that we found was that calves that achieved lower serum IgG in the first 24 hours, so calves that had a lower level of passive immunity, they actually had a reduced mortality risk when they were fed higher quality transition milk. Now, this isn't what we want. We would prefer every single calf to achieve high levels of passive immunity and, as we've discussed, get off to a flying start. But if we do have calves that slip through the net for whatever reason, this shows the power of transition milk in reducing sort of disease risk for these animals, and this was disease risk up to weaning. So it'll include sort of, we know that diarrhea events are often in the early neonatal period, up to day 14, 21 perhaps, and then we get more cases of respiratory disease later on. So it included those events as well, which I thought interesting. One of the other things that the study showed, which will probably be a relief to your listeners was, traditionally when we have a block calving or even a block lambing system, a lambing system, we often talk about the disease challenge increasing over that block calving period. And people often say, oh God, yeah, towards the end, I'm getting more scour or I'm losing more calves or whatever. But the study actually showed that was statistically significant. That was correct. Animals that were born in April, May were more susceptible to mortality events than the animals born in February. And interestingly, from our study, because as you can imagine, through a calving period, the calvings were more dense at the beginning than they were at the end, the transition milk quality by the end was pretty much flatlined down at being whole milk, because we only had one cow calving every couple of days, and we had a lot of calves in the younger group. So we were diluting the milk excessively, and we were feeding the whole milk. So almost as though you got a crossover there between disease challenge increasing and that reduced quality of transition milk.
So the question I was going to ask Ryan was, you were saying about how they're getting this protection effectively for those 10 days. We've already discussed that we get gut closure at around 24 hours. So what do we think is actually happening in those calves to give them that protection? Is it localized immunoglobulins in the gut? What do we put it down to?
That's a fantastic question, Sarah. And that is, if you ask, different research scientists in the field, they probably would all have a different answer to that question. But I think your point there is definitely relevant. The localized protective effect of these antibodies. And again, coming back to vaccinating, that is really, really important. Just because the antibodies aren't absorbed, we know that when they're kicking around in the gut, they are going to bind pathogens and provide what we call a localized protective effect, which naturally happens in adult animals through mucosal immunity, but that's not established in calves until 21 days of age. So there's the antibodies, but also the nutritional component. Remember that transition milk has got a higher percentage of protein and a higher percentage of fat than whole milk. So you've got, the protein is obviously essential for growth, for the tissue building processes, and the fat provides energy. So there's the nutritional component of transition milk, which helps the calves. And obviously, if they're well nourished, their own endogenous immune system is going to kick in sooner. But also we have increased levels of bioactive proteins, things like growth factors. So there's growth factors within colostrum, things like IGF-1 and growth hormone, which stimulate the growth both systemically or overall in the calf and locally in the gut. Transition milk has increased levels of these growth factors. And then we also have antibacterial proteins like lactoferrin. They're very, very potent in colostrum and in higher levels in transition milk. And of course, higher level of prebiotics, complex sugar molecules that feed your healthy bacteria. And if you populate your gut with healthy bacteria, then you're going to keep out the bad bacteria. So many, many theories on why transition milk is beneficial. Probably all of them are a factor.
But it's those things that we're not talking about in the industry. It's that's perhaps new to us, that we've perhaps heard of growth factors and these sorts of things, but we're not regularly talking about them. And I think that's perhaps what this research is really highlighting, that actually there is something really new and fantastic to talk about on farm.
Yes, I agree.
Just to take a step back, you talked about at weaning. At what stage were you weaning? Was it weight? Was it age? What was the factor?
So the biggest factor, Andrew, was the weather in West Wales. So you can imagine the calves that were born in February, they were kept in the shed a bit longer. So they were perhaps a little bit older when they were weaned. The animals born later on, if the weather was good, we tried to get them out onto once a day milk with a milk trailer in the fields, and then weaned onto the pasture, because obviously a pasture-based grazing herd, they sort of have the mindset of wean as soon as possible to encourage forage consumption.
No, that's right. And then the next thing I was going to ask you, obviously we talked about some of the benefits, and I'm sure there's some more, but what are the risks of pooled transition milk?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Andrew, because obviously if we're pooling milk, then we are potentially increasing disease risk if cows contributing to that pool have disease. So we know that there's certain pathogens that are transmitted via colostrum transition or whole milk. Things like mycoplasma, which is obviously a disease that's endemic now in the UK, and you need to have consideration of that. The good thing about mycoplasma is heat susceptible. So pasteurizing will kill mycoplasma. That's potentially not the case for things like Johne's disease, and something we have to consider here, and I know you do in the Southwest as well, which is TB. So pasteurizing at 60 degrees centigrade for 60 minutes potentially will reduce the activity of Johne's disease and TB, but it won't remove all viable organisms. You can pasteurize and kill those organisms at higher temperatures, but then you destroy the beneficial components within the transition milk. So it's a real balance. So if you go over 63 Celsius, you can have increased activity against those organisms, but then you're what we call denaturing the proteins. You're destroying all those beneficial proteins we talked about. So it's really, really important to have good disease control plans for things like Johne's disease and TB to make sure that the animals contributing to that pool aren't transmitting disease.
So, and undoubtedly don't put any Johne's positive cows into that pool of milk.
Yeah, I mean, I say, it's fairly common sense for your listeners. I'd say they're all got a Johne's control plan in place and pretty up to speed with that, I would hope.
So you've spoken about sort of the differences in growth. Was there anything else that you found within these calves that was different, sort of depending on that IgG level?
It was just the reduction in mortality risk for calves with a low serum IgG, and I'm a bit sort of divided on this because I'm someone that is really, really interested in prevention. So if I see a calf with low serum IgG, my mind says, what went wrong? What went wrong there? It's going back to the cues of colostrum. Is it the timing? Could we do something different? Could we test the quality? Was this animal stressed? Did we have to deliver the calf? Is it unavoidable? I would like to go back and say, well, let's make sure that doesn't happen again. But it is quite interesting that the power of high quality transition milk was such that if a calf, which we know is susceptible, has increased susceptibility to illness from having low serum IgG, if a calf such as this receives high quality transition milk, then you can actually mitigate that risk. And as I said, that was a risk up to weaning, so it included respiratory events as well as diarrhea events. Well, all health events actually. So yeah, that was really interesting. And remember that out in North America, they're using colostrum to actually treat diarrhea. So they've shown that if you have a calf with diarrhea as an adjunct to diarrhea therapy in conjunction with your veterinary surgeon, you can actually use colostrum to shorten the number of days that animal's suffering with diarrhea and then improve its growth rate to weaning.
I'd not come across that. That's really interesting. I mean, it makes total sense.
But it gives you an idea of the power of bovine colostrum. And obviously, once again, we, rather than treat calves with diarrhea using colostrum, we'd rather sort of prevent as many as we can. But it's just another indication that gives you an idea about the power of colostrum or transition milk.
Definitely. Like Sarah, I'd not heard of that one before, but it makes perfect sense that it's giving you all the good stuff to get that guts going again, isn't it? And improve that immunity. Now, you touched on it a little bit with the Wagyu, and as I say, that's going to be one of my questions. I mean, we're a year, is this a year down the line since this was done? 2 years down the line. 2 years down the line, must be. 2 years down the line. what follow-up has there been? Have you seen with those dairy replacements, I don't know, a difference in the fertility as maiden heifers to then come into the herd? Because I guess they'd be coming into the herd now. And then you talked about some of the beef animals. If you were able to follow on, what results have you seen from this?
Yeah, so I've got to be careful here, Andrew, because I get a little bit excited when I see the data. And obviously, it has to be statistically significant. So you have to have the stats run on it in order to make an accurate conclusion. But the answer to your question is I've been following these animals right up to now. They've been weighed regularly. Obviously, the dairy heifers have been bred. Now, I wasn't able to analyze that data too closely because they're actually run with the bull. So, it's a little bit more difficult to analyze. If you've got AI dates, you know how many serves they've had, then that's obviously more detailed data. But the dairy heifers are now entering the herd. They'll be calving over the next month, 6 weeks. And then we're going to have lactation data from them and then fertility data. So, and in time longevity data. So I'm going to follow this cohort right up until all of them have ceased their productive lives. So the dairy animals, I've got weights on them, but we might have to be a bit more patient with them. The beef animals, there was, out of the 251, there was 135 replacements. All the rest were beef, of which 92 were Wagyu crosses. So what we're doing there is we're looking at carcass grading, marbling score, days to reaching finishing weight. I'm going to accumulate that data and then run stats on it as well.
I'm guessing, though, that probably those majority of those beef animals were later when the quality wasn't there.
It was generally, Andrew, yeah, but it was a mix. It was a mix. I believe there was a Wagyu bull on the place because it seemed to be Wagyu calves popping out all randomly. So you know how it is. You sort of have on paper your calving plan, but yeah, we had Wagyus throughout the season. So we'll have a varied range there.
So what you've got, as you say, if this is 2 years down the line, what are the results you're seeing on those beef animals? I mean, I'm guessing some of those must be finished by now.
So I'm literally, I was speaking to the chap yesterday who's finishing them. So I'm just in the process of accumulating the data. So I don't want to mislead your listeners and make conclusion before I got accurate data. But I can tell you the trends that we saw before weaning continued. So the bigger, stronger animals obviously kept growing. They've got better feed conversion efficiency, so they're utilizing the grass better, and they're going to be finished sooner. It looks that way to me. But probably what I would prefer is to wait until I have some productivity data from all the animals and come back and do another podcast with you.
I was just about to suggest that. So we're on the same page. You'd be more than welcome to come back in a year or two's time when you've got that data to fill us all in and tell us where that's gone, because that would be really interesting to know.
And is this still funded, this study, going forward, or was it just that original bit that was funded?
It was just the original testing was funded by the Welsh Government, by Farm and Connect, but I am receiving support from SCCL for the continued observation of the data, for which I'm very grateful. So, yeah, thank you to SCCL for that.
And I think it's really important that that companies out there are supporting that research, because that's how we find out things, and particularly when we're doing research on a commercial farm like this, Ryan, that it's making sense to other farmers when they see what's happened and all the data behind it. So I think it's a really important part of research.
Yeah, and I'm very conscious as a veterinary surgeon. There's been obviously a push in recent years for improving sustainability of meat and milk production and reducing antibiotics. And as a veterinary surgeon, obviously you do an annual health plan with the farmer, and quite often we're saying to the farmer, we need to reduce antibiotics. But you have to give them some tools in order to do that. So you can't just say, well, yeah, we need to pull the rug here and reduce our antibiotics in this group. we have to give them some strategies to put in place so that the requirement for antibiotics is reduced. And that's why I've enjoyed this work so much, because it gives producers a confidence that colostrum and transition milk or extended colostrum feeding for neonatal calves in that early period is an investment for their future productivity.
So this data was obviously published, say, in the Journal of Dairy Science in the autumn of 2025. What's the reception of it been since it's been published?
That's a good question, Andrew. I mean, it's a really, really high level journal, and there are a lot of publications on colostrum and transition milk. So it's one of many. But personally, the feedback that I've had when I've been delivering the material, I did a roadshow in the Republic of Ireland with some Trial Nutrition who make calf milk replacer, and it was very well received over there, because the feeding strategy, Ireland's a heavily pasture-based dairy system over there, and the feeding strategy was quite familiar to them. So actually, because it's an observational cohort study on a commercial dairy farm, it seemed to be more relevant. They found it more interesting, because sometimes, you might have a clinical trial and a university research farm, and sometimes sort of the actual boots on the ground, the farmers think, well, hang on, that's not like my farm. So I was able to talk them through it and what I did, and yeah, it was well received.
Well, exactly. The theory of it, and then it's actually making it practical to be easy on farm, isn't it? Because it's like all these things. It's like whenever I used to go and buy a tractor, it had to make sure that the dipstick or wherever was easy, because if it was behind this, that, and whatever, people just don't do it like they're supposed to. It's got to be practical and easy for people to follow up with.
Yeah, and I think I would urge your listeners to, and I've been guilty of this in the past. We get a disease in the calf shed, and we're immediately thinking, what do I treat this disease with? How am I going to, get it out of my shed? And really, the reality of the situation is all these pathogens we talk about, rotavirus, cryptosporidium, they're ubiquitous in a farm environment. They're everywhere. Okay, so think of them as opportunistic pathogens. They're sitting there waiting for you to mess up, and then they will cause disease. And of course, once it's like a ball coming down the mountain, once they cause disease in one calf, then that animal is shedding billions more pathogens into the environment, and it then makes it more difficult for the other calves to remain healthy. So I would urge your listeners to try to think about, instead of, I've got this disease, how do I treat it? Try to think about, okay, how has the door been left ajar for this organism to do its damage, and how can I close that door? And a lot of that, we're talking about colostrum management in calves. We're talking about environment, sanitation, housing, nutrition, vaccination strategies. Rearing calves is not easy, but you have to have a strategy whereby you encompass all these factors to try to prevent these pathogens, because they're there and they're waiting. So, I think it's important that we think in terms of maximizing our strategy to prevent illness instead of treating it.
I'm looking at the time, thinking it's time we wrap this up. So, like usual, any last words of wisdom, Ryan?
I just hope that your listeners have gained something from listening to what we've been talking about this morning. But again, I would urge them just to not consider colostrum as a yes or no tick box. Has that animal had colostrum? Yes. Okay, we're all good. There's many, many factors involved with colostrum management in that first 24 hours, and it's small margins. If you can improve a little bit here and a little bit there, you will see the benefits long term.
Sarah?
I think what I've taken away from it is that it's actually sparked my interest to find out a bit more about these growth factors and all of those other factors that this transition milk is providing to these calves. It's really quite excited me that there's something new that I'm going to be able to talk to farmers about and actually try and help make that difference on farm. So I'm really excited by it.
Good. And for myself, I guess we talked about it in some ways. This message has been out there a long time, but now with more data coming from the likes of Ryan and others, it's backing up what we've been saying with hard data that these things make a difference. Having the correct colostrum, what it does, and now obviously with the angle of sustainability by making sure that calf has a good start in life. Whether it's colostrum or the transition milk is obviously the point of this trial, what a difference that made to it as well. But it just shows that getting it right in those first 24 hours or 6 hours, 24 hours, week, 14 days, whatever your measure is, getting it right then makes such a difference over the life of that animal, its whole life, in terms of its growth, in terms of its productivity, in terms of is it even worth continuing with it before past that initial weaning stage maybe, and instead you should go, okay, that dairy replacement hasn't matched it should just go switch to beef because it's not going to have that longevity in my herd. And so ultimately Ryan coming back maybe with some of that data in a year or two's time would be absolutely brilliant to know what knock-on effect that's had. I just think it's brilliant that we're backing up what the industry has been saying for a long time with new information, with more understanding. And we've touched on the epigenetics, we've touched on the immunology, the fact that you can test on farm easily yourself. You don't need a vet to do this for you. And it's like everything. If you can't quantify it, you don't know what's going on. You can measure this stuff to then see what the effect is longer term. And it is worth making that effort within that initial period, because that's when you'll make the difference. It will be then, not at 12 months old, oh, she's a bit underweight, let's feed some more feed to push her up to bulling weight. You've got to make that difference right early on. So no, it's been absolutely fantastic to hear from you, Ryan. So thank you very much. It's much appreciated. So I guess otherwise it's a goodbye from me.
Thank you, Ryan. It's goodbye from me.
Thank you for having me. Goodbye from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses, or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingshay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.